When did your professor's grade appeal get you expelled? The expulsion notice arrived by certified mail on a Thursday morning in late October, delivered to my apartment while I was in my engineering thermodynamics class at Riverside Technical University. I came home at noon to find the envelope wedged in my door, official university letterhead visible through the plastic window, and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was a single-page letter from Dean Whitley stating that I was expelled effective immediately for academic misconduct, specifically for threatening a faculty member and attempting to extort grade changes through blackmail. The letter said I had 48 hours to vacate campus housing, that my student ID and access cards were deactivated, and that I was barred from campus property pending a formal conduct hearing in 30 days. I read it 3 times standing in my doorway, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. Academic misconduct, threatening a faculty member, extortion. None of it was true. All I'd done was file a formal grade appeal 2 weeks ago after Professor Leonard Carver gave me a failing grade on my capstone design project, a grade that made no sense given the quality of my work and the rubric he'd provided at the start of the semester. My roommate Nathan found me still standing in the doorway 20 minutes later, staring at the letter. He asked what was wrong, and I handed him the paper without speaking. Nathan read it quickly, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. "This is about the grade appeal, isn't it? Carver did this because you challenged him." Nathan was pre-law and had helped me prepare my appeal documentation, reviewing university policies and helping me organize my evidence showing the grade was arbitrary and unfair. We'd been careful to follow every procedure exactly, filing through official channels, providing detailed documentation, maintaining professional language throughout. There had been no threats, no extortion, nothing even remotely resembling the accusations in this expulsion letter. I told Nathan I needed to call my parents, and he nodded, heading to his room to give me privacy. I sat on our worn couch and dialed my dad's cell phone, knowing he was at work but needing to hear his voice anyway. He answered on the 3rd ring, and I explained everything that had happened, my voice breaking as I tried to make sense of how a grade appeal had resulted in expulsion. Dad was an engineer himself, had graduated from Riverside Tech 30 years ago, and understood the weight of what was happening. "Ian, listen to me carefully. Do not talk to anyone at the university without a lawyer present. Do not sign anything. Do not admit to anything. I'm calling our attorney right now and we'll be there tonight." He paused, and I could hear the anger in his voice when he continued. "This professor is lying about what happened. We're going to prove it." Mom got on the phone next, asking if I was safe, if I needed them to come immediately, telling me this would be okay, even though we both knew it might not be. After we hung up, I sat there trying to understand how my entire future had collapsed in the span of 2 weeks. I was a senior, 3 months from graduation, with a 3.7 GPA and a job offer from North Point Engineering waiting for me after graduation. My whole life had been building toward this. Then Professor Carver gave me a 35 out of 100 on my capstone project, failed me in his class, and destroyed everything when I dared to question why. The capstone project had been our entire semester's work in advanced structural analysis, Professor Carver's senior-level civil engineering course. We'd each been assigned to design a pedestrian bridge meeting specific load requirements and environmental constraints, then justify our design decisions using the structural analysis principles we'd learned. I'd spent 4 months on my design, running calculations, modeling stress distributions, optimizing material choices, creating detailed CAD drawings. My bridge design was innovative, using a cable-stayed configuration that minimized material costs while exceeding all safety requirements by significant margins. I'd presented my project on October 3rd along with 6 other students in our class section. Professor Carver had asked pointed questions during my presentation, challenging several of my design choices, in a way that felt hostile rather than academic. I defended my decisions with calculations and evidence, showing exactly why my approach worked. Other students had noticed Carver's aggressive questioning, several of them telling me afterward that he seemed determined to find problems with my work, even when there weren't any. When grades posted 3 days later, I stared at my screen, unable to process what I was seeing. 35 out of 100. Failure. The comments Carver had left said my design was structurally unsound, that my calculations contained fundamental errors, and that my presentation demonstrated insufficient understanding of core concepts. None of that was true. I'd triple-checked every calculation, had my stress analysis reviewed by a graduate student in the structural engineering lab, had built a scaled physical model to verify my load predictions. My design worked. More than that, it was elegant and efficient. Several students from other sections had asked to see my calculations because they'd heard my approach was clever, but Carver had failed me anyway, and his comments were vague enough that they didn't point to any specific errors I could address. I'd immediately gone to his office hours to ask for clarification, bringing my complete project documentation. Carver had been dismissive, telling me the grade stood, and that I needed to accept responsibility for poor work, rather than making excuses. I'd left his office and gone straight to the engineering department office to request copies of the grading rubric and project requirements. The department coordinator, a woman named Allison Trent, who'd been helpful all semester, printed everything for me within 10 minutes. I spread the documents across a library table and went through my project point by point, scoring myself against the rubric Carver had distributed at the start of the semester. By the rubric's own standards, my project should have scored at minimum 88 out of 100, possibly higher. Every required element was present and thoroughly addressed. My calculations were correct and clearly documented. My presentation had been professional and comprehensive. There was no way to reconcile Carver's 35 with the rubric he'd created. Either he'd graded me using completely different standards, or he'd deliberately failed me for reasons that had nothing to do with the quality of my work. I documented everything, created a detailed comparison showing what the rubric required versus what I'd delivered, and filed a formal grade appeal with the engineering department chair, Professor Diana Voss. The appeal process required a written statement explaining why I believed the grade was unfair, supporting documentation, and the original graded work. I'd spent 3 days preparing everything, writing and rewriting my statement to keep it factual and professional, organizing my project documentation, and highlighting specific rubric criteria Carver had ignored. Nathan had reviewed the final appeal packet, confirming it contained no inflammatory language or personal attacks, just a clear presentation of evidence showing the grade didn't match the rubric. I'd submitted it to Professor Voss on October 10th, following every procedure outlined in the student handbook. The handbook said grade appeals were reviewed within 10 business days, that the department chair would examine all evidence and consult with the faculty member before making a determination. I'd expected maybe a meeting, some questions about my work, possibly a revised grade if Voss agreed the original was unjustified. Instead, I got an expulsion letter accusing me of crimes I hadn't committed. Dad and Mom arrived at my apartment at 8:45 that evening with their attorney, a woman named Rebecca Ortiz, who specialized in education law and university conduct cases. Rebecca sat at our kitchen table and read through the expulsion letter carefully, then asked me to walk her through everything that had happened with Professor Carver from the beginning of the semester. I explained the capstone project, the hostile presentation questioning, the failing grade that contradicted the rubric, my attempts to get clarification, and finally the grade appeal I'd filed through proper channels. Rebecca took detailed notes, occasionally stopping me to ask specific questions about dates, witnesses, or documentation. When I finished, she asked to see my grade appeal packet and all related materials. I pulled up everything on my laptop, showing her the rubric comparison, my project calculations, the appeal statement, and the submission confirmation from Professor Voss's office. Rebecca studied it all for nearly an hour, her expression getting more serious as she read. Finally, she looked up, and her voice was controlled, but angry. "Ian, there's nothing in this appeal that could remotely be construed as a threat or extortion attempt. This expulsion letter is retaliatory, and it's likely illegal. Professor Carver must have convinced Dean Whitley that you did something you didn't do." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "We need to respond immediately. The university has accused you of serious misconduct without providing any evidence or giving you due process. That violates both their own policies and your basic rights." Rebecca explained that we'd file for an emergency injunction, preventing the university from enforcing the expulsion until a proper hearing could be conducted, and that we'd demand to see whatever evidence Carver had provided to justify these accusations. She said universities often backed down when challenged by attorneys because they knew their conduct procedures were legally vulnerable. But her voice also carried a warning when she said some institutions doubled down instead, protecting faculty even when the faculty member was clearly in the wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep, lying in bed replaying every interaction I'd ever had with Professor Carver, looking for clues about why he'd do this. Carver was in his late 50s, tenured, had been teaching at Riverside Tech for over 20 years. He'd published several textbooks on structural analysis and consulted for major engineering firms. Students generally considered him tough but fair, his classes difficult but worthwhile. I'd never had any issues with him before this semester, had actually looked forward to his capstone class because of his reputation. But something had changed during my presentation, some shift in his demeanor when I'd defended my design choices. He'd seemed almost angry that my calculations were correct, frustrated that he couldn't find legitimate problems with my work. At the time, I'd chalked it up to him having a bad day or being stressed about something unrelated. Now I wondered if there was more to it, some reason he'd wanted to fail me specifically, but I couldn't figure out what that reason would be. Rebecca filed the emergency injunction on Friday morning, and the hearing was scheduled for Monday afternoon before Judge Patricia Holbrook in County Circuit Court. The university's attorney, a man named Thomas Ashford, filed a response arguing that the expulsion was proper under university conduct policies and that the court shouldn't interfere with academic decisions. Rebecca countered that this wasn't an academic decision but a disciplinary action based on fabricated allegations, and that the university had violated its own procedures by not providing me with the evidence against me or allowing me to respond before imposing punishment. Judge Holbrook reviewed both filings during the hearing, asked pointed questions about the timeline and the university's failure to follow due process, and issued a temporary restraining order preventing Riverside Tech from enforcing the expulsion pending a full evidentiary hearing. The judge also ordered the university to provide copies of all documentation related to the expulsion within 48 hours, including whatever evidence Professor Carver had submitted about alleged threats or extortion. The university's evidence packet arrived at Rebecca's office on Wednesday morning via courier. Rebecca called me immediately and asked me to come to her office right away. When I got there, she had documents spread across her conference table, her expression a mix of disbelief and anger. "Ian, you need to see this. It's not what I expected." She handed me a printed email chain and I started reading. The first email was from me to Professor Carver, dated October 12th, 2 days after I'd filed my grade appeal. The email said I knew about Carver's side consulting business and that unless he changed my grade to an A, I would report him to the University Ethics Board for conflicts of interest. The second email, dated October 15th, escalated the threat, saying I had documentation of Carver using student work in his consulting projects without permission or attribution, and that I'd go public with the information if he didn't cooperate. Both emails were supposedly sent from my university email account, with my name in the sender field and my student ID in the signature line. I stared at the emails, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. I didn't write these. I never sent these. I don't even know what side consulting business he's talking about. Rebecca nodded slowly. I believe you, but someone sent them from your account, or at least made it look that way. These emails are what Professor Carver used to justify the expulsion. She pulled up another document, a sworn statement from Carver claiming he'd received threatening emails from my account after I filed the grade appeal, that I'd explicitly threatened to damage his reputation unless he changed my grade, and that he'd reported the situation to Dean Whitley out of concern for his safety and professional standing. The statement was dated October 16th, 3 days before my expulsion letter was issued. Rebecca pointed at the timeline. Notice anything strange? Carver received these supposed threats on October 12th and 15th, but didn't report them until October 16th. If you were really threatening him, why wait 4 days to tell anyone? She pulled out her laptop and started typing. We need a forensic analysis of these emails. I'm calling a digital investigator to examine the headers and metadata. The digital forensic analyst, a man named David Coe, examined my university email account that afternoon in Rebecca's conference room. I gave him my login credentials and he began pulling up server logs and email metadata, explaining what he was looking for as he worked. Every email has headers that show the route it took from sender to recipient, IP addresses, timestamps, authentication data. If these emails were actually sent from your account, there will be a digital trail. If someone spoofed them or accessed your account from elsewhere, that will show too. David worked for 2 hours, occasionally muttering to himself or making notes. Finally, he turned his laptop screen toward us. These emails weren't sent from Ian's devices. The IP addresses in the headers don't match the locations where Ian typically accesses his email. On October 12th at 3:47 p.m., when the first email was supposedly sent, Ian's account was accessed from an IP address registered to the engineering building faculty offices, specifically from the third-floor network node. He pulled up another screen. The second email on October 15th came from the same IP range, same building, same floor. Someone with access to that network sent these emails, and based on the location data, it was almost certainly Professor Carver himself. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her expression hard. He framed you. Carver sent threatening emails to himself from your account, probably using a faculty computer, then reported them to the dean to justify getting you expelled. This is criminal fraud. She started gathering documents. We're taking this to the police and to the university president. This isn't just a grade dispute anymore. This is a faculty member fabricating evidence to destroy a student's academic career. I felt dizzy, the full weight of what had almost happened crashing over me. If Rebecca hadn't filed the injunction, if we hadn't demanded to see the evidence, if David Coe hadn't examined the email metadata, I would have been expelled based on Carver's lies and no one would have questioned it. My degree would have been revoked, my job offer canceled, my reputation destroyed. And Carver would have gotten away with it because universities almost always believed faculty over students when misconduct was alleged. But now we had proof he'd fabricated everything, and Rebecca was right. This was criminal. The meeting with University President Dr. Raymond Fisher happened on Friday morning in his office on the top floor of the administration building. Rebecca had requested the meeting through official channels, indicating she had evidence of serious misconduct by faculty and administration. President Fisher was in his early 60s, wearing an expensive suit, his office decorated with awards and photos of himself with prominent donors. He greeted us with professional courtesy, but his expression was guarded. Rebecca didn't waste time with pleasantries. She placed David Coe's forensic report on Fisher's desk and explained exactly what it showed. Professor Carver had accessed my email account from faculty computers, sent threatening emails to himself, then used those fabricated emails to get me expelled. The evidence was definitive and documented. Rebecca's voice was cold when she said the university had expelled a student based on fraudulent evidence without conducting any investigation, and that this represented catastrophic institutional failure that exposed Riverside Tech to massive liability. President Fisher read through the forensic report carefully, his expression darkening with each page. When he finished, he called his assistant and told her to get Dean Whitley and the university's general counsel to his office immediately. Then he looked at me directly for the first time. Mr. Reeves, if this report is accurate, the university owes you a profound apology. What happened to you should never happen to any student. His voice sounded sincere, but I was too angry to care. An apology wouldn't erase the week I'd spent thinking my life was over, wouldn't restore the trust I'd lost in the institution I'd chosen for my education. Dean Whitley arrived within 10 minutes, a thin man in his 50s who looked nervous when he saw Rebecca and me sitting there. Rebecca handed him a copy of the forensic report and watched his face go pale as he read. You expelled this student based on Professor Carver's claims without verifying whether the emails were legitimate. You didn't examine the headers, didn't question the timeline, didn't even give Ian a chance to respond before destroying his academic career. That's not just negligent. That's willful disregard for student rights. Dean Whitley tried to defend his decision. Professor Carver is a respected faculty member with over 20 years of service. When he reported receiving threats from a student, I had no reason to doubt him. Rebecca cut him off. You had every reason to doubt him. The threats supposedly came immediately after the student filed a legitimate grade appeal challenging an unjustified failing grade. That alone should have raised red flags. Instead, you rubber-stamped the expulsion without any investigation. She pulled out another document, my grade appeal packet. Did you even look at this? Did you review the evidence showing Carver's grade was arbitrary and violated his own rubric? Or did you just take his word that the student was a problem? Dean Whitley's silence was its own answer. He hadn't reviewed anything. He'd simply believed Carver's accusations and authorized the expulsion, treating me as guilty without any due process. President Fisher's expression suggested he was calculating the legal and public relations damage this scandal could cause. He turned to his general counsel, a woman named Patricia Guerrero, who'd arrived during the confrontation. What's our exposure here? Patricia Guerrero reviewed the evidence, and her assessment was blunt. We're facing potential lawsuits for defamation, violation of due process, emotional distress, and interference with educational opportunity. The fabricated evidence and lack of investigation create significant liability. If this becomes public, the reputational damage to the university will be severe. She looked at President Fisher. We need to make this right immediately. Fisher nodded and turned back to me. Mr. Reeves, the expulsion is rescinded effective immediately. Your student status is restored, all access cards and privileges are reinstated. We'll remove any reference to this incident from your academic record. Additionally, the university will refund any legal fees you've incurred and provide a formal letter of apology. He paused. We'll also be investigating Professor Carver's conduct thoroughly. If the evidence confirms what this report suggests, he'll face serious consequences. Rebecca wasn't satisfied. That's not enough. Ian filed a legitimate grade appeal that was never properly reviewed. We want that appeal addressed immediately by an independent faculty committee, and we want assurances that Professor Carver will have no further contact with or influence over Ian's academic standing. President Fisher agreed to both demands, promising that a neutral committee of senior engineering faculty would review my capstone project and issue a fair grade within 1 week, and that Professor Carver would be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The meeting ended with paperwork being drawn up to formalize everything, and I walked out of that office feeling vindicated, but also hollowed out by the stress of the past 10 days. Rebecca drove me back to my apartment, and before I got out of her car, she told me something I'd been thinking but hadn't wanted to voice. Ian, there's something else going on here. Carver's reaction was extreme. Failing you, then fabricating evidence to get you expelled when you challenged the grade. That's not normal behavior, even for a vindictive professor. He was desperate to shut you down, which makes me think your grade appeal threatened something bigger than just his ego. She suggested I look into Carver's consulting business, the one mentioned in the fake emails. Maybe there was truth buried in the fabricated threats, something Carver was actually worried about being exposed. I spent the weekend researching Professor Carver's outside activities, starting with his university faculty page and working outward through professional association directories and corporate filings. What I found was extensive. Carver owned a consulting firm called Structural Integrity Solutions, registered as an LLC in the state database. The firm's website listed services including bridge design, structural assessment, and expert witness testimony for construction litigation. Major clients included 2 regional construction companies, a state transportation department, and several law firms. The business appeared to be lucrative based on the project descriptions, with Carver billing himself as a leading expert in structural analysis. Nothing about the business was secret or obviously problematic. Faculty were allowed to consult outside the university as long as they disclosed potential conflicts and didn't use university resources inappropriately. But then, I found something that made my stomach drop. One of the projects listed on Structural Integrity Solutions' portfolio was a pedestrian bridge design for the city of Meridian, completed in June this year. The description and the rendering image looked familiar. I pulled up the portfolio page and compared it to the design files from my capstone project. The bridge in Carver's portfolio wasn't identical to mine, but it was structurally very similar. Same cable-stayed configuration, same load distribution approach, same optimization of materials to minimize costs. The design principles were almost exactly what I'd developed for my capstone project. I checked the timeline. Carver's consulting project was supposedly completed in June, 4 months before our class even started. But the design resembled my work too closely to be coincidental. I searched through my project files, looking at my early conceptual sketches from August and September when I was first developing my approach. The cable-stayed idea had been mine from the beginning, an innovative solution I'd worked out after studying several existing bridge designs and identifying ways to improve them. Had Carver somehow seen my early work and used it for his consulting project? Or had he stolen someone else's design and then failed me when I independently came up with something similar, worried I'd recognize his theft? I called Nathan into my room and showed him what I'd found. He studied the images carefully, his expression getting more serious as he compared them. Ian, these are way too similar to be coincidence. Either he copied your design or he had access to something that influenced both of you. Nathan suggested we look at previous year's capstone projects, see if other students had developed similar approaches that Carver might have stolen. We went to the engineering library that evening and requested access to the archived capstone project database. The librarian explained that all projects were kept on file for 10 years as examples of student work and for accreditation documentation. She gave us access to a computer terminal, and we started searching through projects from Professor Carver's classes over the past 5 years, looking specifically at bridge designs. What we found was a pattern that made my hands shake with anger. 3 different students in the past 4 years had designed cable-stayed pedestrian bridges for their capstone projects. All 3 designs showed innovative approaches to load distribution and cost optimization. All 3 students had received mediocre or failing grades from Carver with vague comments about insufficient analysis or structural concerns. Nathan pulled up Carver's consulting portfolio again, and we compared the dates. Within 6 months of each student's project, a similar design appeared in Structural Integrity, Solutions Completed Projects list. A student named Yusuf Ibrahim had designed a cable-stayed bridge in his 2019 capstone, received a C grade. In March 2020, Carver's portfolio added a bridge project with nearly identical structural approach for a client in Redwood County. A student named Diana Wu had created an innovative suspended design in 2021, failed the class. By October 2021, Carver's portfolio featured a unique suspended pedestrian bridge for a municipality in Oregon. The pattern was undeniable and systematic. Carver had been stealing student designs from capstone projects for years, using them in his lucrative consulting business, then grading the students poorly to discredit their work and prevent anyone from noticing the theft. When I'd filed a grade appeal with documentation of my design process, he'd panicked because a formal review might expose what he'd been doing. So he'd tried to destroy me first, fabricating evidence to get me expelled before anyone could look too closely at his grading practices or his consulting work. Monday morning, I met with Rebecca and showed her everything Nathan and I had discovered. She examined the archived projects, compared them to Carver's portfolio, and confirmed what we'd found. This is intellectual property theft on a massive scale. Carver has been stealing from students for years, profiting from their work and using his grading authority to silence anyone who might challenge him. Rebecca made several phone calls, setting up meetings with University President Fisher, with the State Licensing Board for Professional Engineers, and with an intellectual property attorney she knew. By noon, we were back in President Fisher's office with the expanded evidence. Fisher reviewed everything carefully, his expression getting grimmer as the pattern emerged. He called in Patricia Guerrero again, and she confirmed this created enormous legal exposure for the university. Not only had Carver committed fraud and theft, but he'd done so repeatedly using his position and university resources, making the institution potentially liable for damages to all the students whose work had been stolen. President Fisher suspended Carver immediately with a formal investigation to begin that afternoon. He also authorized Rebecca to contact the affected students whose work had been stolen, offering them the opportunity to join a formal complaint against Carver and to have their grades reviewed. I was granted access to my complete academic file, including all of Carver's grade records and comments, to ensure nothing else had been falsified. The independent faculty committee reviewing my capstone project met that same afternoon. 3 senior engineering professors examined my design, calculations, and presentation materials. They compared my work to the rubric Carver had provided and to standard expectations for capstone projects. After 2 hours of review, they called me into their meeting room. Professor Voss, the I committee chair, delivered their determination. Mr. Reeves, your capstone project is excellent. It demonstrates sophisticated understanding of structural analysis principles, innovative problem solving, and thorough documentation. By any objective measure, this work deserves a grade in the A range. We're assigning you a 95 out of 100 and recommending your project be featured in the department's showcase of exceptional student work. The vindication felt real but incomplete because I knew there were other students who'd suffered what I'd nearly suffered, who'd received unjust grades that damaged their GPAs and limited their opportunities, who'd had their work stolen without even knowing it. Rebecca helped me coordinate with Yusuf Ibrahim, Diana Wu, and the 3rd student, a man named Kevin Tran. All 3 were shocked to learn their designs had appeared in Carver's consulting portfolio, angry that their work had been stolen and their grades deliberately lowered to hide the theft. Yusuf had graduated with a lower GPA than he should have had, affecting his graduate school applications. Diana had left engineering entirely after failing Carver's class, assuming she wasn't good enough. Kevin had struggled to find employment because his capstone grade made him look incompetent to recruiters. Each of them had stories of Carver's hostile questioning during their presentations, his vague criticisms that didn't point to specific errors, his refusal to explain the low grades. The pattern was identical to what I'd experienced, multiplied across years and victims. The university's formal investigation concluded 3 weeks later. The investigative report, which Rebecca obtained through discovery requests, documented systematic theft of student intellectual property spanning 6 years. Carver had stolen complete or partial designs from at least 11 students, using their work in his consulting projects without permission or attribution, generating an estimated $400,000 in consulting fees from student work. The report also found that Carver had violated university ethics policies by not properly disclosing conflicts of interest, had used university computers and resources to run his private business, and had falsified academic records to lower grades for students whose work he'd stolen. The fabricated emails and false expulsion charges against me were characterized as attempted obstruction of an internal investigation. The university terminated Carver's employment effective immediately, revoked his professor emeritus status, and reported him to the State Professional Engineering Board for license review. The State Engineering Board moved quickly once university records were provided. Carver's professional engineer license was suspended pending a full ethics hearing, preventing him from consulting or stamping engineering documents. Several of his former clients demanded audits of the work he'd done for them, concerned that designs might have been plagiarized without their knowledge. The city of Meridian, which had paid Carver $85,000 for the bridge design that was largely stolen from my capstone work, filed a civil lawsuit seeking return of fees paid plus damages. Other clients followed with similar suits. Structural Integrity Solutions went out of business within 2 months as contracts were canceled and liability claims piled up. Rebecca filed a civil suit on behalf of me, Yusuf, Diana, and Kevin, seeking compensation for the intellectual property theft, academic damages, and emotional distress. The university settled within 6 weeks, rather than face discovery that would expose how long administrators had ignored warning signs about Carver's behavior. The settlement provided financial compensation to all 4 of us, expunged the incorrect grades from our academic records, and established new oversight procedures for faculty consulting businesses. Diana Wu, who'd left engineering after failing Carver's class, used her settlement money to return to graduate school. She'd actually been talented enough that several programs accepted her, once her record was corrected, to show her real capstone grade. Yusuf Ibrahim applied to the PhD programs he'd been qualified for years ago and was accepted to his top choice. Kevin Tran got a new job at a better firm once his portfolio could include his actual capstone work without the stigma of a failing grade. For me, the correction came just in time. My revised transcript showed a 3.9 GPA instead of 3.7, and North Point Engineering confirmed my job offer was still valid for after graduation. But something had changed in how I viewed the academic system. I'd always believed that if you did good work and followed the rules, you'd be treated fairly. Carver had taught me that wasn't true, that authority figures could abuse their power systematically, that institutions often protected the powerful rather than the vulnerable, and that justice only happened when you fought for it with evidence and resources. The criminal investigation into Carver's fabrication of the threatening emails took longer because prosecutors had to build a case that met criminal standards of proof. David Coe's forensic analysis was central to that case, demonstrating definitively that the emails had been sent from faculty computers during times when only Carver had building access, using techniques to mask the sender that required technical knowledge consistent with Carver's background. The district attorney charged Carver with computer fraud, identity theft, and making false statements to educational officials. The trial happened 9 months later, and I testified about the grade dispute and the expulsion, providing context for why Carver had fabricated the evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Holbrook, the same judge who'd issued my emergency injunction, sentenced Carver to 18 months in prison, followed by probation, saying his abuse of academic authority to destroy a student's future was unconscionable and deserved serious consequences. I graduated in May with my corrected GPA. My capstone project featured prominently in the engineering department showcase. Professor Voss, who'd chaired the grade review committee, attended my graduation and told me she was proud of how I'd stood up for myself and exposed misconduct that had harmed other students. My parents were there, crying happy tears, relieved that the nightmare had ended and I'd come through it. North Point Engineering sent a representative to congratulate me and confirm my start date. During the ceremony, several administrators gave speeches about integrity and ethical responsibility, and I found their words hollow, given how readily the institution had been willing to expel me based on fabricated evidence without investigation. Real change came not from speeches, but from the new policies implemented after Carver's misconduct was exposed. The university now required independent verification of all academic misconduct allegations before disciplinary action. Faculty consulting had to be disclosed annually with project details. Student intellectual property was formally protected with clear policies about ownership and attribution. None of it would have happened if I just accepted the failing grade and moved on. I started my job at North Point Engineering in June and discovered I'd been assigned to work on a pedestrian bridge project in Clayton County. The senior engineer supervising the project asked if I'd done any bridge work during school, and I showed him my capstone design. He studied it carefully and then told me something I hadn't expected. This is really innovative work. The cable-stayed approach with this particular load distribution hasn't been widely used, but it's very efficient. Did you develop this independently? I explained my research process, the months of calculations and optimization. He nodded slowly. I ask because we evaluated several consulting proposals for this Clayton County project last year. One of them was from a firm called Structural Integrity Solutions, run by a guy named Carver. His design looked a lot like what you've got here, but when we checked his references, some clients raised concerns about the originality of his work. We went with a different consultant. He smiled slightly. Sounds like we made the right call. Why don't you take the lead on developing the detailed design for our project? You clearly understand the structural principles involved. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.